evening. My name is Michelle Young Maplethorpe, and I'm delighted to be here tonight to welcome you to the first Asia Society at the Movies program of 2022. I also want to wish our viewers who are joining us from across the globe all the best for the new year. We're thrilled to present an encore discussion of Jessica Kingdon's new documentary, Ascension, as part of our film program, Asia Society at the Movies. This critically acclaimed film about China's class divide is now shortlisted as one of 15 films in the documentary feature category for the 94th Academy Awards. Tonight and this morning in Hong Kong, Asia Society Hong Kong Executive Director S. Alice Mong will moderate the conversation with director Jessica Kingdon and producers Maggie Lee and Kira Simon Kennedy. For those of you who are not familiar, Asia Society at the Movies is an ongoing series of film screenings and conversations showcasing a broad range of films and filmmakers from across Asia and the Asian diaspora. The initiative celebrates established and emerging voices, contemporary films and classics, and documentaries, as you'll see this evening. In this program series, we present films both on a streaming platform which can be watched around the world, where there are Asia Society centers, and also live events which, moving forward, we'll look forward to presenting more often at our New York Center and around our 14 global centers. Please visit asiasociety.org/museum/events for more details, or just search online for Asia Society at the Movies. I'm pleased to share that this program is made possible by MTV Documentary Films. The program is presented by Asia Society Museum, Asia Society Hong Kong Center, and Asia Society Southern California as part of Asia Society at the Movies. So it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to Alice.
Thank you, Michelle, for that generous introduction. And I am so glad to be joining this morning here in Hong Kong, and I know evening in East Coast, for today's program for discussion on Ascension. This is the second discussion that Jessica Kingdon, the filmmaker, and Kira Simon Kennedy has done for Asia Society. I think last time the two of them did a joint program at Asia Society in New York in December. So I'm really delighted to kind of be hosting today's program from Hong Kong. And so before I get started, I'm going to briefly introduce our three speakers. Jessica Kingdon, who is a Chinese-American director and producer of this wonderful film that I'm sure many of you have already seen. And she was named one of 25 new faces of independent film by Filmmaker magazine and selected for the 2020 Doc NYC 40 Under 40. And I checked out her IMDb information. She has 20 producer credits, 10 director credits, and 6 writer credits, and 5 cinematography credits to her name. And she's joining us this morning from LA, but she's generally based in New York. Maggie Lee, co-producer of Ascension, is a Shanghai-based producer, and she today is joining us from Jiangsu, where she is home for the holidays, for the Chinese New Year holiday, and we're so delighted Maggie can join us from China this morning. Her production work and documentary have included Plastic Watch, and she's done work for BBC, PBS, NBA China, as well as corporate clients such as Deloitte, Bain, Collier, and JP Morgan. Kira Simon Kennedy is co-founder and co-director of China Residency, a multifaceted art profit that has supported over 100 different creative exchanges between China and the rest of the world. And she has lived in China for many years and generally was pre-COVID between China and the US. And she's joining us from Philadelphia this morning. So with that introduction, I want to turn it over by my first question to all three of you is those of you who are interested in more of the filmmaking process, I highly recommend that you check out the Kira and Jessica's conversation with Stephen Bang in December of last year that Asia Society New York hosted. But today, I really want to focus on the storytelling. And I wanted to start with all three of you. How did this project came about, and with each of your background, How did you get involved with it from the beginning? And I understand it was filmed in 51 cities and process took about 4 years. So I'm going to start off with Jessica. How did the project get started in the first place?
Thank you so much for having us. It's really great to be back here at Asia Society and to be speaking with you. So just really glad to keep this conversation going. The way it started was I made a short film in 2017 called Commodity City, which takes place in Yiwu, China, and it's the largest wholesale mall in the world. I was drawn to this space because of the inherent contradictions of the impersonal nature of the global supply chain, but also the intimacy that most people all over the globe have with this place that we don't know about. And in the space, even though you see the logic is created by the demands of the global economy, the scenes that were spilling out into the hallways were scenes of people raising their young children and people fighting and having arguments or laughing and joking. So I just kind of loved that juxtaposition between what you'd expect to see and what you saw. And so from there, and Kira also produced this film, so I had already been working with her. And from there, I wanted to continue making films in China, loosely about the global supply chain. And initially, this film was really set out to be more of a trilogy because I didn't have such a grand ambition to make this long feature in 51 locations in China. It was going to be a series of shorts that is kind of tracing consumer goods life cycles and more about the cycle of production, consumption, and waste. But as we actually, got some funding and started going to China and shooting, the kinds of materials that I was getting happened to be, I found it was more about a quest for upward mobility, new types of labor happening in China today, and a study of materialism that's present in China, but also the rest of the world. And I was kind of looking at what materialism and capitalism looks like in contemporary China today. So that's what the film really morphed into over a series of shoots. And that's kind of how it began.
Great. Kira, can you talk about how you got involved in your background? You've been based in China on and off for over a decade. So how did you get involved?
Definitely. Well, it's a long roundabout story about how I got to China, but it involved learning Chinese in middle school in France. But then I've been working with an amazing group of art spaces and artist residencies all across mainland China and Hong Kong, running this arts nonprofit. And Jessica and I actually met through our mutual friend Isabel Chung, who's in Hong Kong, and actually just opened up a new art space there called PhD Art Group. And we met, just really through friends after Jessica had already been filming in Yiwu, and she was looking for a producer who had some experience with film and China. And we just really hit it off. And as soon as I saw the footage she showed, I was so blown away. It was so beautiful and so on point and like nothing I'd ever seen before that really captured just what it felt like to be in these spaces, but also just these intimate moments of people's lives and really this focus on people and the humanity behind things. I've seen so many people make films about China without actually connecting with what it really is like to be there. So I was just really eager to help her out at the very beginning. We were really amazed by the reception that, Jessica's first 10-minute short film had. And so people immediately started asking her, what are you doing next? What's coming after? And we had kind of rehearsed a quick answer before Commodity City first premiered at festivals to be like, well, if people ask what else is coming, maybe we can say it's a trilogy of shorts or a series of shorts, because Jessica had already had a lot of other ideas of how to continue this. And it really just snowballed from there. And we were able to luckily get the support we needed at the right time to be able to keep filming. And Jessica really was able to knit together this patchwork from very, very simple beginnings.
Great. Maggie, your story.
Yeah, it was really random actually, because just like Jess was one of the new director faces, I was actually a very, very new producer as well. And I became a producer just by simply running into another experienced senior producer and then becoming friends afterwards. But then in short, I was put in touch with Jess through a senior producer I was working as only an assistant for. But then she thought I was qualified enough to take on my own project. And then Jess was just like, after we hit it off in a video chat, we really thought we can work together because our personalities also click. So in a way, at the very beginning, when I saw Jess's the list of shots that Jess provided, I was a little bit confused as of it didn't have, but later I got to know better because as I get to understand the observational approach of the filmmaking process, which I love a lot because throughout a lot of the films or documentaries that I watch, there are a lot of narrations and a lot of, let's say, not so objective twists that doesn't necessarily, stand very solid when it's viewed by different groups of people. And an observational approach, as I later learned more about it, I thought it's amazing. And I'm just really interested in being part of this as objective as possible filmmaking process. Later on the list of kind of a montage collection of different shots were put into clearer but not so solid and fed up, feeding people kind of a logic chain, which I also love. And also the process is amazing for me, not only because I find it really enjoyable to work with Jess and Nate, but also just the process itself is a life journey for me as well. Because a lot of the contacts and connections that I had to make for this film just turned out to be lifelong friendships for me. So, which is another great gain for this filmmaking process.
Great. And one of the things, I was reading some of the reviews, I also have to confess, watching the movie, I was waiting for the narrator. I was waiting for an expert. In fact, one of the critics said, no voiceover, no written narrative, and no expert interviews. And I have to say, because of COVID, many of us have been watching Netflix. I've actually been watching a lot of documentaries, especially NHK programs. And I was expecting some sort of narration, and it took about 10, 15 minutes, finally realized, I'm not going to get any. But so how did that came about, Jessica? Did you always have that in mind? I mean, we're so used to, and especially those of us who are probably older, you guys are in under 40s, but we were just expecting a certain type of documentary, having seen American Factory, having seen other documentaries on China or this part of the world. So how did the process of this no voiceover, no narration, and no expert interview, how did you always have that in mind when you were thinking about this film, making it, Jessica?
Yeah, there is a whole lineage of documentaries that employ this kind of style where you're sort of dropped into a location and the audience is left to their own devices to really get their own bearings there. And, they're not always the most popular, since sometimes they're harder to access in terms of attention. But I wanted something that was kind of on the line of something that was more entertaining and would draw you in, but simultaneously had this kind of air of mystery and also letting the audience really draw their own conclusions. And for me, while I was shooting and editing too, I was often feeling so many different emotions at once. And I think there's no correct way to feel. There's no correct emotion to land on. So for me, this film was about holding a multiplicity of truths and of feelings at once. And it was from the beginning, from the get-go, I had conceived it this way too. No narration, no interviews. I think for me, one reason why I'm not as drawn to interviews in documentary is because I find during interviews, they become more informational, they become more expository, and they become more performative. In interviews, people are telling you what they want you to hear. And in observational filmmaking, it's something that it's more about the subconscious. It's not something that you can plan or really present to an outside audience. So it's kind of a way of communication that's a bit more oblique, but I find ultimately more satisfying. And I find really, I feel more connected in that particular genre. So that was definitely an intention that I had from the beginning.
Maggie, Kira, do either of you have anything to add to this?
I think also the stronger is great and makes the audience and subjects relax even more, because once they get used to it and then they feel more relaxed and natural, and then they just don't care about how they're going to appear on the film. But whereas if you go, we only have 30 minutes of time slot to shoot and let's go, 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 it feels more scripted and they feel the pressure to act for you. But the whole point of documentary is revealing what exactly is their natural habitat and how they would react and talk and interact with people. And I feel like Jess's approach, including for the film Commodity City, is all about putting the camera over there until people feel like, oh, this is part of my environment and I'm just going to go about my business. I don't have much time to care about you, but then this is the most natural state.
And
In fact, go ahead, Kiera.
And I was gonna say, I think it's fascinating because people are experts in their own lives, in their own work, and we don't need an outside person who's, you know, one degree removed, who's an academic, who's going to tell you what's going on. We really trust the audience to be able to make sense of things, but also the people who have invited us into their work lives and are willing to show things. I think we have so much to learn from their expertise and how they do their jobs and how they go about life and how they navigate the situations. That to me personally is just more interesting than what you could read in an article or a book, or have someone who's an expert in supply chains explain the abstract of it.
A friend who saw the movie, her quote was, quote, "The camera just run, whoa." So is that what you guys did? I mean, you know, it sounds like it is, to capture some of these wonderful images. I mean, you're letting the film and the people involved in it. I was thinking of the woman in the factory, in the doll factory, the woman sitting there looking, she kind of a new trainer, and just kind of, you capture her essence in some ways in that short, so it was just kind of letting the camera run. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it too. Like even the woman in the plastic water bottle factory, when she takes a moment of rest and she puts the water bottle by her face and looks towards the camera, even though we never hear her speak, and in another documentary, maybe we would follow her home and hear about her life, that's a completely valid form of filmmaking. But this film was not doing that. It was trying to get to a different type of essence or a different type of truth, because there's so many forms of truth out there. And so this one was just leading into that particular truth, where it's kind of more universal, maybe because it's not so specific. And yes, in terms of the shooting process, we would just let the camera roll for a long time, and it was very tempting, you know, to always want to move the camera because there's so many shots happening that I wanted to grab. But it really, you know, it took a lot of discipline for me sometimes to not touch the camera, because I feel like I'm just wasting time here and I got to get this shot or that shot. So it was really an exercise in patience and kind of a meditation after a while of shooting, and also of having a faith that the camera is picking up something that I'm not even necessarily seeing. Like that shot you mentioned of that young woman who is training to work at that sex doll factory. I can't remember if I shot that intentionally or not. That might have just been us doing like a wide shot of the sex doll factory, and then looking at footage, I saw her and was like, oh, this shot's about this young woman who is being initiated into this world. And there's so many, you know, we feel for her. Suddenly we're like in her shoes. And what does that feel like to be in this sex doll environment and being young and thinking this could be your first job? And I realized that's what the shot was about. But while I was shooting it in that moment, I don't know if I knew that. And I think it's just because we had this patience, this style. My co-cinematographer and producer, Nathan Trisdell, and I would kind of pass the camera off back and forth to each other. And we both used this style of shooting on the tripod. So we had a static shot, this kind of unmoving shot that's not hampered by anything. We just tried to do that as much as possible. And we would get, you know, a lot of gems back that we didn't realize at the time. Great.
And in terms of another comment was variety and access. I mean, you guys really, you know, as I said earlier, 51 cities, 51 places you shot. And how did you get that, well, the variety and then, but also the access? You know, it seems to me you guys got some really interesting, you know, slice of life stories. So the access, and also another part of that question too, for me has been, I noticed most of these cities, I don't see that much of Beijing and Shanghai. So was it mostly in tier 2 and tier 3 cities that you got these shots? So the access and variety are the question that I have for you. Any of you want to kind of take that on?
I'll just start quickly. Firstly, to answer that first question, we shot in Beijing and Shanghai, but I think it was kind of areas right outside of the city center, so it doesn't seem like it's Beijing or Shanghai. But it was kind of pretty almost like evenly distributed in terms of the tiers of cities we would shoot in. In terms of access, it was 51 locations, and each one really had its own unique story about how we got access. But, on the panel, we have two ladies who have been essential into helping us gain access into a lot of these places. And I think in addition to them and their ability to kind of navigate this, there was also, because the film itself, I was open to what was available, open to what was in front of me, and I didn't go into locations or into the film with the thesis I was trying to prove. It allowed us to pivot. So when places said no, it didn't ruin the whole film. It's not like one location, the whole premise was on that. And most places did say no, of course. It was just being persistent. So I'll let them kind of give more detailed about how they did it.
Before they answer the question, I wanted to ask a question about language. I imagine Maggie and Kira, you both speak Mandarin, and Jessica does not?
No, yeah, that's right. I don't speak Mandarin.
Okay, so that's why access. All right.
Yeah.
Gara, you want to start first?
You go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely. It was a really fun hunting process as well. I mean, first off, I look at some of the items, I go, oh, this is impossible, or this is not in my ready connections. But in general, there are like, I would say 3 approaches in general. One is through my ready connections, what I feel like, oh, this friend might know that. And then it's through friends connections with some incentives maybe. And then the last one is cold call, which I found to be very productive, but very frustrating as well as the process. Because I mean, a lot of people, they have no reason to believe you in first sight when they're getting a cold call, right? And their first question is like, where did you find a way to invade my privacy and find my personal phone number, right? That's their general reaction. And you sound like a fraud saying that you want to shoot a documentary and you don't want me to pay for it. Even like some of the contacts that I became really great friends with, they told me later that even the day before you came with Jess and Nate, I thought you were a fraud, but I thought there's nothing to lose. I'm in my own country and stuff like that. But it just turned out to be, what I learned from it is the biggest takeaway is to never take one answer as the final answer or conclusion. A lot of the times, even for one lead, for example, if I approach first with the public PR department and they said no, then I reach out through a connection who's the CEO's friend or something like that. Eventually it just happens and we look back and go, it's great and it feels great and right to not give up when you get a no for an answer. And it always turns out to be very productive. And one thing I also discovered is that Chinese people, they don't tend to believe you before they meet you face to face, no matter what you show them. The second that you meet them face to face, the hospitality and the genuine friendship that they're going to offer you is incredible, and you won't believe it until you really experience it firsthand. Because a lot of the experiences that me and Jess and Nate had is being driven, to different restaurants, local places for free, for big bosses of companies who are really busy. They would just drive us around and show us the town after the shoot. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to quickly jump on that quickly, I'm curious when about the frauds, like when they were worried we were frauds. I know one person thought that we were wanted to get money from them afterwards, like thought that we were going to charge them for appearing in our documentary. Is that what most of the concerns were, do you think?
Yes, asking for money later, and then just also all kinds of fraud. We might not mention it in the first place, and then they're just, they didn't need to bother, right? It's not like a documentary is going to do them much publicity.
Yeah.
And some of them get really angry too, which is the big frustration. You go call someone and they swear at you all of a sudden, but then eventually it turns out great. And I became so cheek faced. I become like, I can take it so easily, and then I start to joke with them, like, I can help you call the police. I'm a fraud, and I show up. And then it turns out great.
That. One of them, you convinced him, you were like, okay, you know what? He was like, oh, how do I know you're not going to show up and be a fraud? And you're like, you know what? I'll help you call the police if I'm a fraud. I'll call the cops.
Right.
Like,
right.
Okay.
And
it's incredible.
successful.
Maggie made so many like connections and lifelong friends through doing this. Like after we showed up, people's guards were really down because they saw we were real people. They believed us that we weren't trying to like get money out of, scam them somehow. And then, it was so sweet. Like we had so many amazing interactions with people.
Yeah.
Kira, your experience as, I'm sure you, as a foreigner, speaking Mandarin, I'm sure they are impressed. And in terms of building trust and access, they kind of talk about your role in this.
Sure, yeah. I mean, when we first started, it was really just Jess and I, and then we had very, very little money for the first shoot, and we didn't have enough funds to properly hire a lot of people. And so it was more like through existing connections, like through some of the artist residencies. It was every year we would do a big research trip and visit all the art spaces we work with all over. And so I was already going to be like, well, I'm going to be in Chengdu, I'm going to be in Dongguan, I'm going to be in all these places. And so the very first trip was kind of Jessica being like, well, I think this Butler School's over here. So we were kind of just lining up where we were already going to be. We actually had a commission from the British Council to film about the creative scenes in smaller cities that were in Beijing and Shanghai. So I was actually already making a video about the creative scene in Chengdu. And so Jessica actually ended up helping film some of that. So the first trip was really kind of like parallel missions. And in some of the spaces, like the air conditioning factory, the Yuanda factory, that space has an artist residency on the factory campus.
Oh, really?
Really coincidentally. And so when Jessica wanted to film the new worker training, the military style training, I just messaged them because they had invited a lot of artists who do almost like social practice projects with the factory workers. So I was like, well, this is a place that you could stay at that likes hosting artists and that will have a gigantic workforce of folks who work on air conditioning. And so we just messaged them, and that's Maggie, and then just went and got in touch with them through that connection. So some of those were very odd, but very easy. And then at the beginning, we also had a lot of friends who are also artists and filmmakers in their own right, still producers, and started that process that Maggie really perfected of like the cold calls, and just did an enormous amount of research. Like we were looking for Bitcoin mining operations, and we really relied on all the amazing journalism that other people had done to figure out, that these places happen to be next to hydroelectric dams. And so we were like on satellite maps trying to figure out, if we're in Chengdu, maybe there's this town here. So a lot of it was just trial and error. And also just people showing up and being like, you three? And they're like, you girls are here doing what? And we'd be like, no. And they'd be like, oh, are you students? We're like, no, we're filmmakers. And we would tell them exactly what we were up to. And they were just kind of like, huh, strange. Okay, sure, why not? So some of the showing up was just kind of, that was what really got us access.
Well, but when you mentioned, Kira, that you girls, the way having, and Nate is not a girl, and he's part of this process, but being the three girls that you are, and along with Nathan, I mean, it sounds like it worked to your advantage in some ways in terms of access, in terms of building trust. Would you guys agree with that?
We didn't have an enormous crew. There was never more than 3 people. But also Jessica and Nate also are like very amazing cinematographers, and that they're very like discreet, and they're very like direct in the way they work. But we didn't, they were recording their own sound. So we didn't have someone with like a big boom mic. We didn't have enormous lights. Like it wasn't an invasion. It didn't really feel like, we really wanted to have a very small footprint and not really show, which both made it easier, but also made some factories skeptical because they didn't think we looked like a professional crew. One factory was very suspicious because they were asking Jessica and Nate where the host was, like where the talking head was. So I think some places actually, being such a small, discrete team, confused them a bit, because they had been in other media interviews before, and they were expecting, you know, multiple cameras and a big operation.
So I think what you said, Kira, just now reminded me. I mean, a lot of these images that you guys shot, I mean, here in Hong Kong and Asia, those of us who, you know, have been to China, those stories are not unique. We've seen these type of documentary or these stories before, whether it's on TV or documentary. So, but what really impressed me is just the way you guys weave it into a big story. Using cinema. It's cinematically, it's just beautiful in terms of the color, the music. So my only regret in watching this film twice has been that I watched it on my computer rather than on a big screen, because the colors, the music, I know I would have a totally different experience watching it, you know, besides on, and unfortunately in this day, we kind of are living with live streaming, and you also feature a lot of interesting live streamers in China, which is another thing that we, again, are very familiar with, whether it's the bike, the bike story, or you know, the bodyguard story, all that things that we're familiar with, but the way you weaved it into this. So I'm curious, is there, what's the possibility of us seeing it in a big screen here in this part of the world, and or China? I mean, has it been shown, or is there plans to be showing in China?
Well, so far we haven't actually gotten into any of the film festivals in China that we submitted to, but we're trying to find a way in. So we're still trying to find ways for distribution angles in China, and we're still not sure what's going to happen with that. But, you know, of course, we would love to. And we've shown it to people informally within China, like kind of closed, informal friends and family kind of screenings, but we haven't been able to do anything official yet. And we're trying to, and would love to.
Well, let's hope somebody out there is hearing this and maybe want to see this, like me, on a big screen.
Please get in touch if that's something that you can make happen. We would love for this to exist and for people to be able to experience it big in theaters like intended.
I now want to touch upon the poem. The poem really kind of that bookends, you know, in the beginning and the end of the film. And the poem just is so right for this. And I just want to know, at first I thought it was something that, knowing Jessica's family and that, you know, Jessica, you found it in your grandmother's, you know, things. But how did the poem come to play a role in this film?
Yeah, it's quite a convoluted story and something that happened only at the end. So on the last shoot that I was there for China, which was December 2019, and great timing for the pandemic, of course, we got very lucky. I mentioned to my mom that I was going to the city called Changsha to shoot in that air conditioning factory that Kira was talking about. That's also an artist residency where people are in the military fatigues doing those exercises. Those are kind of like white collar workers, actually, like engineers and accountants who are doing those military exercises for the air conditioning factory. So that's why I went to that city. When I told this to my mom, she was like, oh, that's where your grandfather and great grandfather are from, which I didn't know because she had never been there. And I was really surprised. And I mentioned this to Kira offhandedly. And because of Kira's connections to, you know, different artist networks in different cities in China, she put me in touch with this scholar that she knows there. And I, you know, kind of on a whim, messaged him and was like, hey, I'm coming to Changsha. My family is from there. And in a day's notice, he just dug all of this information up and found relatives of mine that are living there. And so on a day's notice, they came and met me in between shooting. And with them, they brought this man who is the president of the Poet Society that my great-grandfather, Zhang Zi, used to be a member of. And he brought a book of poetry with him. And I was so excited. And they didn't let me take it home because it belongs in that museum. There's a museum of, you know, different poetry from that era, modern poetry, I guess it would be. And then cut to a few months later when we're getting ready to submit the film to our first festival, we had to settle on a title. And for years we had been calling it Untitled PRC Project. we hadn't come up with anything better yet. And Kira urged me to look through these poems, which I kind of begrudgingly did because I didn't think that there would be anything that resonated in this way. And there was one poem that I found called Ascension that resonated with me, because in the poem, the narrator ascends to the height of a tower, and from that vantage view is able to see all the chaos and invading territory beneath him, causing him anxiety. That poem was written in 1912, the fall of the last dynasty in China, so a time of great political upheaval and turmoil. And similarly with this poem, Ascension, I was thinking about class ascension, or how people feel like economic progress will kind of relieve our worries, but there are these unforeseen consequences that are kind of a byproduct. So just the paradox of progress idea. So that's why it resonated, and that's why we named the film after the the film after the poem, and then decided to, put that quote from the beginning and the end poem in. And Maggie was with me when I met my relatives too. Yeah, that was really fun.
And how, so in terms of, you've kept in touch with the relatives, and what did your mom and said about all of this?
There's an article that I wrote for this magazine called Talk House. But yeah, it was really great. And my mom's been in touch with them and chatting, and actually their daughter, two of the people, their daughter, did I tell you this, Maggie? You know how she lived in California? She works for Google at California, and she came to our screening in San Francisco.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's
That was
amazing.
crazy.
Comes full circle.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I just feel because that poem written over 100 years ago, and I think this is, I've known your mom, and as Michelle said before, having run the Museum of Chinese in America, and as a Chinese American, my family is from Jiangsu, and having been back to it's now Anhui, but having been back to the village with my dad, who passed away about almost a year ago. But that journey with my dad, in terms of the connections and similar stories of the Jiapu, that connection. And here in southern China too, I think this is an area we've done a lot of programs with diaspora, Chinese American diaspora, searching for their roots. I think no different than what some of the stuff that's going on in the U.S. Everybody is interested in some ways at a certain point where we come from. And I know there are museums in southern China, in Guangzhou, who have really wonderful diaspora memorabilia history, and that's post-COVID. That's something that I hope to be able to do, is to travel to southern China. And, I'd love to invite Jessica to come with me to maybe document some of it, because the journeys of Chinese in America is really fascinating. And just the diaspora stories, whether it's Chinese in Jamaica, Chinese in Southeast Asia, the diaspora story is just, and Hong Kong is a place of that too, in terms of the connection. So that's why that poem really resonated with me when I first, and that's why it's great that you were able to connect. And but I think in terms of what another, we also have a lot of questions coming in. So another 5 minutes, and then I'm going to go to the question. But I think for Kira, as a kind of an American, what attracted you to, you're a diaspora, an American diaspora in China. What was it that made you, decided to go to China in the first place and study Chinese?
Well, I'm actually confusing many generations of different Jewish diasporas fall into each other. My parents are actually Americans who moved to France when I was young, and they put us in a school that taught Chinese. So I actually had a lot of amazing opportunities to go to China through France, and ended up, really just sort of going back and forth, and had a lot of great opportunities to study and do homestays. And then, my partner's family is also from Beijing, and we met in college. It was just sort of like many overlapping things that kept me going back. There's no specific thing. It was honestly just the power of having access to language lessons at a very young age that I think really kind of made it happen. And I was very lucky, right? My first job out of college was making music videos for a record label in Beijing for Modern Sky. So I got in with a very cool job and met all these amazing musicians and artists. And it was just a really exciting time to be there. And so I think that's also something that I just really fell into accidentally. And I'm extremely lucky that I've been able to keep it going. But yeah, just thinking about what you were just saying about diasporas too, I think it's been so special through China Residencies to have reconnected so many artists who have family ties to China, but who had never been. A lot of folks went for the first time as artists, and we've worked with artists from, like you're saying, like the Caribbean, from Italy, from Australia, who had been gone for maybe 1 or 2 generations. And I mean, Jessica has one of the most spectacular stories of reconnecting with roots, but it's happened so many times. And I think it's something, I have family that's Hungarian speaking. During the pandemic, I started trying to learn Hungarian Duolingo. And my grandfather was like, why are you doing that? That's useless. There's no one there. There's no point. And we have a very different relationship with our hometowns in that we don't have anyone there that we can go back to. And I think it's so special that people are, even though there's been all these divides, are able to go back and forth and rebuild those ties.
And Maggie, what is your connection in terms of, you're home for the holidays? You're one of the few. Yes. We're so envious of you that you can be spending Chinese New Year with your family. Due to the pandemic, some of us are stuck here. And but tell us kind of the roots. I mean, you're from a very illustrious province, but kind of your story from Jiangsu. And how did you end up becoming a filmmaker?
I am pretty traditional compared to all of your stories, non-international, because I was born and raised in China, native, and I had chances to go study abroad in the US specifically, which was my dream at that time. But I, for different reasons, I missed 2 chances going to the US, so I never really studied or lived abroad as well. My hometown is Jiangsu province, the city called Lianyungang, which is a seaside town. And then I went to university in Suzhou, which is a water town. That's half an hour away from Shanghai. So after spending 5 years in Suzhou, learning nanoscience and technology, I became a filmmaker. No, that's not the logic. But so I was supposed to be a scientist. But then after graduating, I didn't go study abroad apparently. But then going to Shanghai and having to work turned out to be one of the greatest decisions that I had to make, or I was forced to make. That turned out most productive and beneficial for my life as well, because up till now, I've spent 6 years as well in Shanghai, taking full-time jobs initially, but then gradually transitioning to a freelancer, which Shanghai is probably one of the best places to be freelancing in as well. Just the international atmosphere and the non-hierarchical structure, comparatively speaking, provides great field for me to just like explore all different kind of industries and types of projects and work at the lowest cost possible, because then you get paid to learn to do things, right? Doesn't that sound amazing? Before turning to a filmmaker, producer, I was working as a simultaneous interpreter and researcher and magazine editor as well. So kind of related to language. I never, that was not my major, but that's also like passion turned lifelong surviving skills, I guess. And then also just running, like I said, I ran into a producer for Shanghai Media Group at that time, playing pool in a bar. And then we became friends. That's my people skill that I used to get access as well for the film. Great. Right, exactly. Then one thing led to another, projects built up my portfolio, then I stayed in.
Great. I think all 3 of you, your stories are so interesting in terms of your friendship is definitely reflected. So I'm going to end my question with this big, and then because we have some great questions coming in from chat. I think Asia Society, and by the way, Kira, Asia Society now, as of last year, has an Asia Society France. And so we will have to introduce you to our colleagues there. Some of the Asia Society members here in Hong Kong, as well as other parts of the world, have helped establish Asia Society in France. So I'm really glad to hear your story. But my last question, actually, I have a lot more, but I know I want to get to the audience. And I think for us here at Asia Society, we're talking about building bridges and talking about shared values. But in this current state of, Sino-US relations, and that there's a lot of tension. And, what do you want the audience to take away, whether it's an American audience or Chinese audience, to take away from your film?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this film is coming at an interesting time when there's this increasing mutual hostility almost between the two nations, which I find really sad and so counterproductive because we clearly can't live without the other. The two are so interconnected and interdependent and intertwined. Like there's no China without America, there's no America without China. And even though people might say that the two seem completely different, I would argue that there's more similarities than we realize. And so for an American audience watching this film in China, I hope for them to really think about themselves being reflected back in the film rather than seeing it as kind of a portrait of another country that's has nothing to do with them. I want American audiences to be implicated in the film, to feel like they're part of it and to make it reflect on their own American culture. And for people in China, I guess to think about the different ways that sort of this, and this is, I mean, this isn't just China, this is a global audience, just to understand how the human motivation, the source, a lot of it is motivated by asset accumulation, and for people to be more aware of that and kind of thinking about the meaning of work and really the meaning of life.
Yeah, definitely. I think exactly everything Jessica said, that this is as much a film about China as it is a film about capitalism and a film about the humans that power the supply chain. I mean, when we started making this film, no one was ever talking about supply chains. And now I hear people talk about it in a way that is clearly, they see the part that affects them personally. And they're like, oh, the supply chain is broken. Well, it's not the supply chain, it's the people behind it that don't have jobs, or they can't do things, or they can't move things. And I think if people really had a better sense of, yeah, just like Jessica said, how interconnected we all are and how intertwined all of these things are, and how it's behind every object is so many people's actual lives. You can't make these generalizations about, oh, it's China, oh, it's in the US. It's so much more complicated and it's always so much more complex. And I really hope that that's what people take away from this. And not so much a fixation on like a flag or a passport, but really on just the human process behind everything.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting also because is it okay to say that I hosted a small private screening here in China just because Jess was kind enough to allow me to host a small screening of within 20 of my friends, which was really interesting for me. I focused mostly on their facial expressions when they were focusing on the film. And also I took the effort to collect their feedback, which is really interesting to compare those feedback between among like completely local Chinese people and then Chinese people who had quite international background or at least international way of thinking, and then Chinese Americans who come back to China and spend years to relearn about Chinese culture and rebind. It's really interesting because even for one specific scene or line or one part of the music, a whole piece of music that Dan created, people had such drastic differences. Some people think the music is so artistically on point to each of the scene transition and everything in terms of art appreciation. But then local Chinese people who don't appreciate who can't appreciate art as much as the higher level, I think they tend to think the music is kind of putting a negative tone to the film or to the scene, which is really interesting to observe because coming down to the end of it, when it comes to understanding and perception of things, no matter it's film or other art forms, it not only depends on nationality or kind of a political mindset, but also just individual level, the education level, the art appreciation, or just the upbringing that they experienced. Every individual has a different system of processing things that they're seeing. I think this is fundamental to put into mind before we cast a conclusion on a nation, on a community of people. Yeah.
Okay, great. I mean, this is the question coming in are just really interesting. One of my favorite character in the film was the bodyguard training. Was he the owner? And the question asked, Well, it says, what were those Secret Service guys training for? The guy who made the training do push-up. So,
Yeah, great question. So the main person you see at the bodyguard training school is the principal and founder of the school. And the students there are training, their ideal job would be to work for like a high net worth individual. So like a really rich person protecting them, which is why I thought it fit into this theme of Ascension, because it's looking at different types of, like this particular section of the film was looking at new types of service jobs created out of the new elite class. So that's why we also had the butler school and the bodyguard school. But in reality, a lot of these bodyguards don't actually end up getting those jobs, those like elite high-end jobs of protecting an individual boss. A lot of them become like security guards at malls or something. And similarly, the butler school, the high end would be to maybe serve a wealthy family or something, but a lot of the jobs end up being working at hotels or something like that.
He's such a great, a lot of people have remarked on how him as a character is both so harsh and so severe with his trainees, and yet so sweet with his pet goats, and yet so mad at that bee. And that just amazing cycle of moments all at once is something that's like such a testament to Jessica's filmmaking of just being in the right place at the right time and noticing how everyone's relating to each other and to the world. And I think that's a perfect example of what she was saying earlier. Like if you interviewed him, what's it like running a bodyguard school, or you interviewed the trainees, you would get this very performative, this is why we're doing this, but you show it so much just by showing how they interact with each other and with the world.
Wow, the scene of the hitting each other and then the bruises, my goodness, you really capture that. That was really full of pain and anguish, but it was the expressions. I think in many ways, it's what I love about the film is a lot of the expression tells the story. You don't need to tell it with words. It's the imagery. But here, one question was talking about the wealthy, the people enjoying the ham, the Iberico ham, and all that. Were they also training for something, or are they just part of the wealthy elite? Says were they?
People tend to be confused by that scene a little bit because I think the people in it seem a little bit stiffer than everyone else, which is an interesting observation to make, because it's like the one scene where we have like the wealthy elites talking and they feel like very stiff and performative, but it actually wasn't staged to be that way. Basically, the main guy who's talking at the head of the table, that's his, the restaurant we're in is his dessert restaurant, and he collects Western antiques and Chinese antiques, and those are his friends. So they're just having like a kind of casual friend conversation, and he's showing his friends his Western antiques, which I thought would be an interesting twinning to pair with the opening of the film, where we have the cheap made in China goods kind of being manufactured, and then you see the people at the top of the supply chain who are fetishizing these Western old antiques. And, I love that line about the nose being able to fit in because the glass is so wide, the rim is wide.
I thought that was really funny. One question, this is great. I think you talked about it a bit in the December program, but the question from the audience was about how was, Jennifer asked, how was the music composed for the different scenes and places? Yeah.
And Maggie, it's really interesting that it's the music that's the thing that's getting people to have these different reactions, because I think music is such a subjective thing. It's so hard to put into words. And in a way, it can be seen as the soul of a movie, where it's really without words kind of expressing something ineffable. But so the composer is Dan Deacon, who's also a musician, electronic musician. And he came on early in this process. We had a very early working collaborative process where he came on after he saw our initial footage. And it was a back and forth kind of, process where Nate and I would record a lot of raw audio files in the field. So we would record like the beeping of the bicycles and bicycle graveyards, the whirring of different machines, the cryptocurrency mine clicking sounds, and using these raw audio files, he created a score out of it. So, and there were times when he would treat the machines in the factories as instruments in themselves. So there was this really interesting interplay between between the machines and between his score. And he would transcribe the beeping, he would manipulate them, he would just do all sorts of interesting processing things. In addition, there was also a guided improv session on strings he would send them to me, and I would kind of place them, send him a scene, and then he would write some new music and I'd edit to that. So it was a very like fluid process.
Great. Another question from Kara, this question from Kara says, how did you decide which factories or groups of people that you wanted to shoot? Did you start off with a list and then as it grow, or did you, what was the initial thoughts for this?
Yeah, Maggie kind of mentioned a little bit the list initially that I first sent her, that I had what I called a wish list of all the places I wanted to shoot in. And I would send it out to Maggie and other field producers that we worked with. And sometimes it was totally unintelligible. Like sometimes it was very specific. Like I knew I wanted to film in a plastic water bottle factory. Sometimes because I wanted to, and that reason is because, I wanted to film the source of a lot of the, we think about plastic water bottles as this problem. There's too many being made. What do we do with them? We can't recycle them anymore. But then like, what about the factory that's making them? What does that look like? And I wanted to shoot in places that were kind of iconic and recognizable. So like initially we were going to shoot in a MAGA hat factory, like the Make America Great hats. But when we showed up there, it was so funny. All of those and correct me if I'm wrong, if my memory's wrong, Maggie, but when we showed up, all those hats were gone because there was a huge order from Canada that they had requested, like 30,000 MAGA hats or something. And so the boss he was instead making these scarves, and the scarves said, "Keep America Great." And I was like, what is this? This is not what I want. Seems like some bootleg version. And they were like, no, that's the new slogan for 2020. You just don't know it yet. And that's what we first heard about that.
Yes, exactly. There was a big order of those Make America Great Again hats from Canada. And part of it also, we didn't get to shoot in production scene of the hats, is also it's off season, because in EU, the commodity city of China, pretty much things are ordered like half a year in advance. Like Christmas season, we start preparing for the stock since June, like in summertime for the big Christmas boom globally. So this is why we come off kind of a off season as well. But you were right that I read a lot of articles sort of positioning EU, the city, as the global political kind of a prophet as well, like because whatever merchandises are coming out of there is predicting who is going to win the next president, or what campaign is going to be at a bigger social level in which country.
And thankfully they were wrong this time around, because all the EU business people were telling you that Trump was going to win, right? Because he of course has so much merchandise, but luckily their prediction didn't.
I mean, maybe some of it was made not in China, but also none of us could have imagined that it wasn't necessarily even going to the US. But yeah, I think in terms of the places, Jessica had this very clear vision that she didn't want any symbolic locations. Like everything had to be what it was. It wasn't standing in for something else. It wasn't a concept. It was truly the thing it was. And then there's some things that the cryptocurrency mines were on the list earlier on because it seemed like this, new frontier that everyone was sort of talking about, and so much of the mining was happening in China. But that actually didn't really end up in the film because it wasn't as visually interesting as a lot of the other places. And at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of computers sitting in a shipping container by a hydroelectric dam. And so that's like something that was on the list and that we tried very, very hard to get access to, and then did at several places. But that mine, even though we didn't really end up filming in it, walking along where along the river that was powering the hydroelectric dam that was mining the cryptocurrencies is what led us to the final scene, that beautiful scene that Jessica filmed of the retired folks going for a swim and the little girls playing in the water. And so even when things on the list didn't end up in the film, sometimes seeking them led us to another place that was really beautiful and that ended up there.
Well, we're coming toward the end, and I want to thank all three of you, Maggie, Kira, and Jessica, for this wonderful conversation. I literally could go on because I have so much more question to ask you guys. And I just love the way you've ended the film with the sculpture of Chairman Mao looking down and with the swimmers, and it was just everything about the film has just been beautifully done. And I want to congratulate all three of you and the team for this really groundbreaking film. And nomination for the Oscars will be announced. You're on the short list with 15 film, but the 5, I guess we'll down to 5, will be announced February 8th. And I wanted to, wish you all the luck. And it would be great. One of the things we didn't touch upon, and that's another topic, is just that this is the first time I've had a all-female panel, and you guys are filmmakers, female filmmaker under age of 40, and just in terms of your careers and so on. So I know I'd love to get back and do a program with you and talking about just kind of how inspirational your story has been. And we started with stories, your stories, and I want to thank Asia Society, our global family, and for this Asia Society at the movie series. During this time of the pandemic, when we're all kind of, locked down, semi-lockdown, can't travel, our Asia Society Hong Kong, our center is currently closed due to the 5th wave. And in New York, I know Asia Society Center and the museum is also closed. But film is one way of really touching all of us. And here, I know in New York, and I know all of our Asian Society family have really used the medium of film to connect. And I think your film is a wonderful example of that, of connecting. I think there's just too many divisions around the world today and too much tension. But a film is really a very easy way to understand visually, literally, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so I want to thank all three of you for taking part in today's discussion. And I want to thank Asia Society, Michelle and others for inviting me to take part. Because as a global family, part of Asia Society Hong Kong, here in Hong Kong, we're alive and well. We're doing all of our programs this last 2 years. Most of it have been online or hybrid. And we look forward to doing more programs like this, connecting, not just the Asia Society global family, but just simply connecting. And thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at future programs online.
Thank you so much for having us. This has been a real pleasure to be here with you all.
Thank you so much.
I know. I really
thank you, all three of you.
Yeah.
And happy Chinese New Year.
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Healthy New Year. Thank you.
Yes.